let's start with a Reuters headline a while back. It was, quote, "Momentum stocks sink," end quote. And the article begins, "Momentum shares like Netflix and TripAdvisor sold off sharply for a second straight day, leaving investors anxious about how much further they may fall." And further down, we hit another of my pet peeves in this same article, quote, "The day's action in momentum names, typically high-growth companies mostly in the tech and biotech sectors that led 2013's rally, ... end quote. So, language. That's really what we're about here, specifically diction, and it gives us a window into other minds, doesn't it? I mean, if you've forgotten some of the terms from poetry class, onomatopoeia, anyone? Diction is word choice. So it's the often unconscious decision to use this word, not that one. And I think coming alive to diction, watching for it, and as we're going to be doing this week, hunting it, I think it rewards us with valuable insights into the degree of thought and sometimes the psychological motivation behind a person's words. And as I mentioned, I do this with investing all the time. But first, let me mention how it really started for me. It was with analyzing sports. So sports was where my English major sensibilities first led me away from things like sports talk radio and toward baseball great Bill James, by extreme contrast. So, for example, sports talk radio is full of debate over who is the MVP. When it's clear, really, that simply first defining what most valuable player is would solve most of the puzzle and save hundreds and hundreds of hot air hours on sports talk radio. Because after all, some people, just looking at the underlying assumptions, some people think the most valuable player is the person that you would draft first. If you had all of the players in a league or a sport, who would you take first? That's, for them, the most valuable player. Somebody else thinks it's whoever was the best contributor to his or her team. Who was the person who added the most value to that team? And usually it would be the team that won it all. And that would be the most valuable player. And those are fundamentally different constructs. They're related. But what's really happening in sports talk radio is that people don't examine their underlying assumptions about what defines something like, in this case, most valuable player. And so you end up with endless names being batted about and debates when we just needed to agree on the term in the first place. So that's kind of how it started with me for sports. And by contrast, there was Bill James, who was an early pioneer in sabermetrics, for those who know it, the scientific study of baseball. He was lionized by the book Moneyball and then the excellent movie made out of that book. Still haven't seen The Big Short, by the way. I know everyone says, got to go see it. Definitely going to see that movie. I know it's really well done. Anyway, James saw with visionary acuity how much sports analysis relied on cliches and the threadbare thinking that often lies behind those. And so he was applying a scientific approach to baseball. He was making hypotheses, gathering data, and putting in play new theories. And he wound up basically upending the baseball intelligentsia at the time, which, by the way, was a bit of an oxymoron back then. But his tool, though, was very simple. It was questions. It was really, ultimately, it was words. He's a writer. And so it was his own words, basically denuding the often inadequate thinking behind the words of others. So that takes us back to the Reuters story. So what is a, quotes, momentum stock? I mean, try right now yourself to define it. Turn to that person next to you in the car or that you just jogged past and ask them for a sec what a momentum stock is. And maybe you shouldn't do that. Not a lot of people would have an answer, but I would submit it's not a very satisfying exercise. But the market recap that I called out seems to do so later. It was using terms like high growth, mostly tech, and led 2013 rally. By the way, this article is pulled from 2014, so that's why it's mentioning the 2013 rally. This could have been written yesterday, of course. But let me suggest my own synonym for those companies, Netflix and TripAdvisor, in the article. And I would go with the phrase leading innovators. I mean, that's basically how I see Netflix and TripAdvisor and really a lot of the stocks we talk about here on the Rule Breaker Investing podcast and that many of us are invested in. So while others, I would say, nearly demonize them by making them sound like, I don't know, flighty, unreliable beasts, we are buying not momentum stocks, but leading innovators. And it's not surprising that those companies are often high growth. They often use technology, and they do, in fact, often lead rallies? And second, since I mentioned this from that same article, what does it say about a speaker or a writer that he or she would use the word name as a synonym for corporation? Again, from the article, the day's action in momentum names. And I'm seeing this phrase used a lot these days. I mean, is the stock market just composed of names? Are names what's employing millions of Americans? To me, that's trader talk. So basically what's happening is the speaker is objectifying and disconnecting the stock market from the business world. And so I think implicit in some of the terms that we've just covered, momentum stocks, momentum names, you can see the underlying thought, which is often, I would describe, the opposite of what we do and how we talk about stocks at the Motley Fool and on all our podcasts, this one included. So there you have it. A few observations on the first couple of phrases or words this week that we're ranting on. Momentum stocks and names, both of which I think show the underlying thought as rather superficial, slapdash, and not particularly connected in with what investing really means.
As always, people on this program may have interest in the stocks they talk about, and the Motley Fool may have formal recommendations for or against. So don't buy or sell stocks based solely on what you hear. Learn more about rule breaker investing at rbi.fool.com.